Okay, shh. Listen to this. This is the tape I found downstairs.
This is Professor Raymond Noble, Department of Ancient History, log entry number 2. I believe I have made a significant find.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff.
Don't you blame the movies! Movies don't create psychos! Movies make psychos more creative!
We have such sights to show you.
Join us! Join us! Who's laughing now? I'm gonna hurt you. You didn't have to punch me, son. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome to another episode of SplatterCast. I am Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And yes, today we have a very special pick inspired by one of our fellow YouTubers, Cody Leach, who kind of brought this one back up to the surface for me. As you can see, if you've clicked on the title and if you can see the background here, we are talking Paul Verhoeven's Hollowman. And this wasn't going to be this early of a pick for me, but obviously if you've been keeping up with the shows, or if you haven't watched our last episode, which was a special episode, it's a double feature this month, we kind of got a little caught up with, all the other interviews and reviews and just a lot of really busy stuff on the channel. So some things had to get reshuffled, restructured, and it just so happened that with that came Hollowman. So, yeah, this was a very awesome thing to kind of get reminded of, because I watched this movie a ton when I was a kid. It was on TV a lot. So it's one of those things where I didn't watch it uncut until I was much older. But it is one of those things where, of course, Kevin Bacon, Elizabeth Shue, people I'm very familiar with, Josh Brolin, in a movie that was kind of a pseudo remake of The Invisible Man. Which was something that I wasn't aware of at the time when I first saw it. But nonetheless, this is a movie that my dad really enjoyed, so I watched this quite a bit. And Luke, when I mentioned that we were going to be covering Hollowman, you got pretty excited. So tell me, what was your first experience with this picture?
Well, Hollowman was a film that I watched a lot as a kid as well. It was something that I did not see this one in the theater, but I know I had seen it going over my dad's house. He didn't have cable, so we'd always go to the video store to rent movies. So Hollowman, I saw picked up from the video store. Obviously very excited. I was always a big Kevin Bacon fan. I think I had seen, as a kid, I had seen Stir of Echoes before this film. So, that's kind of one of those films where you could say, Kevin Bacon dove into horror. So as soon as Hollowman came out, I was extremely excited just to see, what he was going to present there. So this one I had rented a couple times from the video store just because I did like it that much. And then I believe this has been streaming. This is a film that I watched as a kid. You take a little bit of a break from because it's not really playing on TV as much. But then I found it on streaming. It's been streaming heavily on a couple of different platforms. I don't know if it's streaming. I know it's on HBO, Max right now. But other than that, it used to be on, I think it was on Tubi, a couple other free ones, maybe Crackle. So it was always one of those films that, you always turn on. It's very digestible. You can kind of get lost in it, go in and out of this type of film. So it's something that, I think character-wise, Kevin Bacon, I mean, we'll get into it, but, I think it's always captivated me as Sebastian Cain.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, if you've been following the channel, we're big Kevin Bacon fans, obviously Tremors. You say Stir of Echoes, and that is something that you've been very adamant that we'll be discussing at some point on the show. So it's one of those things where, again, this is one of those movies that in his very long and illustrious career, I mean, they have the whole saying, it was at 8 degrees of Kevin Bacon or something like that, where it's like everybody in Hollywood in some form of way is connected to Kevin Bacon just because of how many movies he's been in, and just how many noteworthy films he's been in. But this is one in his career I don't hear a lot of people talk about until you mention it. I feel like this is one that a lot of people forget about, and then as soon as you bring it up, they're like, oh yeah, no, I love that movie. And I think that this is going to be a movie that hopefully, as it goes along, will be due for kind of a resurgence. I think that we might be a little early here, but we'll have to see after this post how many people know about it or how they feel about this, at least. Because I genuinely, like I said, grew up with this. This is one that, even for me as someone who's watched it a ton, when I saw Cody Leach's video and got reacquainted with this, I was just like, oh my God, yeah, like that's a perfect kind of off the beaten path pick for this podcast. And I rewatched it for this. I watched it twice, and I gotta say, there's a reason I love it, because there are a ton of fantastic moments and fantastic performances, and just the kind of reinvigoration, updated story to kind of that Invisible Man story, And I know this isn't a direct remake, so it's not like 2020 is the Invisible Man, where that is you can call that a pseudo remake of the original film. Again, changing the story. I think that film takes a lot of inspiration from this one as opposed to the original Invisible Man. Granted, there's a lot of time in between those films, so you kind of have to look at your contemporaries to update it. But this is one of those ones where I think it gets a little lost in the pack when you talk about really great kind of reinterpretations of those old Universal monster films.
Yeah, and I think this one has a unique spin on it in a sense where, I can't say it's verbatim something like an Invisible Man. It's in the same vein, but like, where I look at the ones that are actually titled Invisible Man, those ones I'm like, okay, so that's very close to the source material. I really feel like Paul Verhoeven went out and wanted to tell kind of a story like that, but wanted to put his own spin on it, which I really feel you can really, you feel as you're watching this film, where it's uniquely own thing while also sort of a source material. I don't know. It's like a weird marriage that they have into it, because it isn't verbatim like that story, and that's why I think I like this one. I already talked about it. It's a very digestible film. I think this is over an hour 30, and it really is a breeze to get through. So you can kind of see those themes that are told in every Invisible Man story. But I think at the end of the day, this one does feel very different.
I agree for sure, and he brings a lot of that's Paul Verhoeven-esque kind of energy to this. I mean, if you're familiar with his work, I think going into this, when I was just kind of looking through his filmography, because it is one of those things where it's like we're probably going to talk about him a couple of times as we continue with this podcast. Obviously, people know him for probably, would you say his biggest movie's probably RoboCop? I think that's probably the safest.
I would say so. I think he's got a couple big ones in there.
He does.
But I think RoboCop's probably his most notable, the one that's kind of stood the test of time in terms of, what I think we had news on the Sunday Scaries a month and a half ago, where we were probably getting some sort of reiteration of RoboCop. So, that kind of pop culture icon still lingering more so than any of the other films. But I think, like, looking at this film, yes, I think Hollowman has a unique spin. Looking at this, you talked about kind of this resurgence maybe that this film will get, and I don't think it's happened yet. I've been waiting for that as well over the past few years, of like more people talking about Hollowman, but I don't think we've hit that point yet. And I think where it's kind of this film where Paul Verhoeven, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, set out to make like a big budget film and really wanted to feel like that, where I think he didn't put his own enough spin, like how he did with a RoboCop or Showgirls or Starship Troopers, where it's like you look at those films and you're like, that's definitely Paul Verhoeven. Where it's like this one, I think, does have a little bit of that, but also more of a big budget kind of that's direction you want to go into. So it doesn't really have a home. I think that's really where we get into this dynamic of where Hollowman has not been found yet by a lot of people.
I don't know, because I definitely sense more of a unique voice from him here than I would say something like a Total Recall. Where Total Recall, it's like, yeah, you can tell there are moments for sure that this is very Paul Verhoeven-esque, as to where, for the most part, that one plays as your typical Arnold Schwarzenegger action film, and a very good one, I must say. I love Total Recall. It's kind of in my mind, looking at his filmography, and again, I have to admit and take my lashings, I have yet to see RoboCop, but Total Recall and Hollowman are for sure my two on his filmography, where I'm just like, yeah, this is the stuff. This is the stuff that I really like, and I can't really pick between which one is my favorite. I gotta say that they just live on two very different planes of existence. As to where this one's probably, more in that horror space, as to where Total Recall is definitely more in that action space. But I just think that they're both very good. But I mean, looking through this man's filmography, he's done RoboCop, Total Recall, as we said. Basic Instinct is on here as well. Say what you will about this film. I know this has got a lot of controversy around it, kind of a cult status to it, but Showgirls is his work. And then you have Starship Troopers, followed up by this. And then he's kind of had a couple of films here. It seems like he definitely takes his time because, since he got out of his boom in the 90s, he's kind of gone from, Hollow Man in 2000, then it was 6 years for Black Book, then Tricked in 2012, and then 2014, 2016, 2014 was something else. And then Ellie in 2016, and then he didn't release another movie until 2021. So it's kind of one of those things where now he's kind of, I think, taken more of a back seat to all of this and has kind of just really made films when he wants to. And, I definitely appreciate that when filmmakers do it. It is a nice treat. I just kind of hope, because it looks like he's going for more of that period piece kind of stuff. That's kind of what he's been doing recently. I really want him to get back to doing something like this. Something, kind of familiar, but with, his added twist to it. Because I think that, that's the best part about this. Is it's like, is this so different that you're not going to, connect with it? It's going to be out there. No, this is very consumable for a wide audience, but it has those nice twists to it, those nice invigorations to it, where you're just like, this definitely sets itself apart in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and going into where I said, I didn't feel his 100% his voice in here, where it's like you look at RoboCop, and again, we kind of get the social commentary there that he was trying to portray with the action figures and his intention of almost making a satirical type of film. You look at Total Recall, you get that whole mindfuck of, is it happening, is it not? With also a bit of a social commentary there. You look at Showgirls, I think that's got its own kind of spin on it, where it really feels unique and different. Starship Troopers, it's the
Total
thing with
satire.
Yeah,
It's like,
you get the propaganda element, whereas Hollow Man, I think, has a unique voice, but I think he didn't go full board himself, where it's like, I think if Hollow Man was full board, that I think a lot of, even, it may not be the biggest budgeted film of a big, general audience just loves it. I think it would have already that cult status that a lot of his films previously do. But I think it was kind of this, he tried to balance it where it almost did not have a home either way. But again, for me, I'm absolutely a big fan of Hollow Man. I think, there's some interesting things here, but I just wish that he maybe put his stamp on it a little bit more, because I think we would be talking about it. Because what was this? This come out in 2001?
2000.
2000. Okay. So, I mean, this film is almost 23 years old. I don't know what month it came out, but it's like, I think, at this time, I think we'd already be talking about this as an ingrained kind of cult-like film.
Yeah. And, I definitely see that as fair. I'm just trying to get you an exact date here so we know if we've crossed that mark yet, but it's over 20 years for sure. It's August 4th. So this summer,
it will
be 23. Which is kind of crazy, but it's one of those things too, where with this being in 2000, it's one of those things where you see, still we're very early into the age of CGI. But I gotta say that one of the things that we're going to highlight in effects, I think that's going to be a very big topic for us this episode, because I think a lot of these effects, although very dated looking in some spots, are still extremely effective in just what they choose to show and how they choose to show it. It's one of those things where no matter how old this film gets, I think that those effects are still going to be effective, just because, again, they're showing you a lot of interesting things. There's a lot of things that when you talk about the story of the Invisible Man, we don't really discuss. And, you know, it's one of those things where I don't remember. It's been a long time since I saw the original Invisible Man, but just the concept of his eyelids not working is such a smart little tiny detail that I absolutely love in driving the madness of our main character here. So it's one of those things where it's like, there's a lot of really smart elements. I mean, Sebastian Cain alone is a very compelling villain in the sense of just, you know, you see the dark side in him before he even goes, you know, full bore evil in this film. And you see just kind of what this man can be. He's on a leash, but what happens when you totally cut it? You know, what happens when your morality completely flips and you don't have to worry about consequences? And I think that that's one of the best elements of this film. It's definitely an element of this film that Cody talked about in his review. So when I went back and watched this, it was something I paid more attention to. And I got to agree with his take on this, is just that, yeah, it is. It's one of those things where you kind of have to put yourself in those shoes and just be like, if I didn't have the consequences of somebody seeing me, or I could get away with things, whether it be, you know, robbery or, you know, voyeurism and stuff like that, it's like, what would I do? You know, what kind of a person would I turn into if you just took the chains off completely? And I'm excited to dive deep into that, because I think, again, not only is it a great performance, but it is one of the more intriguing characters I think we're going to be able to talk about on SplatterCast.
Yeah, I think this film does present a lot of great character work, and a lot of interesting themes as well. And you know, putting that modern stamp on it. And I know you talked about the effects, and I know we're gonna dive into it. Where, yeah, some of them are dated in a sense, but the reason I like Hollowman, and it's for me so rewatchable, is that yeah, some of the effects are dated, but they're not offensively dated. Do you know what I mean? I think
Mm-hmm.
they were so well done for the time that even if they are dated in terms of 2023, it's still a watchable film, and it doesn't kind of, you know, turn you off when you just see, you know, Sebastian Cain in water or anything like that. I
Those
think
are
they,
some of the best moments, I would say.
yes, I think and you know, they use it in the more modern Invisible Man, where I think there's
Mhm.
one scene there that really gets us in terms of they use paint, and it was such a great jump scare in the theater for that one. And I think Hollow Man, looking at this one, I would say they present it even better and in a more unique way, that some of the things that, you know, in a more modern film
They
does.
get to definitely have more fun with it. I agree with you, because, you know, Invisible Man, and that's kind of the beauty of it. And I know we're going to be comparing a lot, but I mean, Invisible Man is another one. I think both versions we're going to want to talk about at some point on this
Mhm.
show. You know, because we love the 2020 version, and I mean, I really enjoy the original Invisible Man. I think that it sets a lot of groundwork for these two films going forward, and, you know, for a lot of movies. But it's one of those things where this one, I think, sets itself apart by also kind of really diving into the depravity aspect of it, in the sense of Sebastian Cain. He really goes into that kind of perverse, you know, element that, you know, we're pretty, you could say Paul Verhoeven kind of likes to dive into those elements a lot in his films. But it's one of those things where in here, that voyeuristic, perverse nature is very apparent, as to where, like, you know, Lee Whannell's Invisible Man, I feel like kind of follows the footsteps of, it's more about like a domestic violence kind of situation,
Yeah.
and just the, if I can't have you, no one can. And, you know, there's a little bit of that here, but I think that this, again, it sets itself apart because it just really shows you the depravity of human nature when, you know, you aren't necessarily like everybody else anymore. You don't have to live by the same rules that every other human being has to. As to where, again, Lee Whannell's Invisible Man is more of that, I'm using this as a tool. I'm using this to further my desires and my, you know, desire to torment somebody who's wronged me. There isn't really, I think only in a few sequences, there really isn't as deep of a, like, perverse nature to that film as there is here. where it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if you're a guy and you're invisible, you know, it's one of those things where I'm sure it's crossed everybody's mind, whether it's voluntary or intrusive thoughts of just like, you know, if I could just, you know, walk around and, you know, go into bathrooms, go into changing rooms and see somebody, it's like, would I do that just because I can? You know, it's something where Paul Verhoeven's not afraid to, you know, follow that, as to where Invisible Man tries to class it up a little bit.
Yeah, I would say in comparing in Hollow Man to the most recent iteration of Invisible Man, I would say Invisible Man is a little more methodical in the sense of, you know,
Absolutely.
taking advantage, whereas Hollow Man falls more into opportunistic, I think, where it's
Very
like,
primal.
yeah, where it's like, you know, and you know, I know we're kind of jumping all over the board, but like looking at Sebastian Kane, whereas like you look at the kind of the acts that he's committing, and you know, a narrative can be, well, you know, a straight-laced kind of guy who's got such a high IQ would never fall down this kind of path. But it's very being anonymous online, where it's like when you have that opportunity to do
Oh yeah.
something and it can't come back on you, that really shows your character, and I think that's really what the kind of commentary that Paul Verhoeven was trying to show with Hollow Man.
I absolutely agree. But I say, why don't we dive into our first segment, which we like to call the account of the macabre.
They could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of the mad and macabre as they were to see that day. For them, an idyllic summer afternoon drive became a nightmare.
This is the segment where we like to discuss, you know, the story. So we've kind of touched on a few things character-wise. You know, we'll break down each segment, of course, but this is purely based on just our thoughts on the story. You know, the events of the film. What are some of our favorite moments? Just really diving into it. So with Hollow Man, we do like to do a little bit of a write-up here. You know, we changed our formula a little bit on the show as far as Luke taking over on a lot of the write-ups. But, you know, it just kind of slipped our mind as we were planning this out again. So I am just going to read off of Google. So forgive me. I am just giving all the credit in the world here to the Google synopsis, so people don't think we're ripping anybody off. But the basic premise and story of Hollow Man is, after years of experimentation, brilliant but arrogant scientist Sebastian Kane has discovered a way to make matter invisible. Determined to achieve the ultimate breakthrough, Kane pushes his team to move to the next phase, using himself as a subject. The test is a success, but when the process can't be reversed, Kane seems doomed to a future without flesh. And I'd say that's pretty good. You know, I definitely think that your write-ups are much more detailed and much better, Luke. But, you know, that just gives us more room to talk. So this movie in and of itself, again, we've said it takes some inspiration from the original Invisible Man story and kind of that aspect of it, but it really gives itself its own setting. Again, we're dealing with somebody who's kind of like a I don't even want to call him an Elon Musk character, more like a Tony Stark or somebody who's, you know, has a lot of knowledge, is very smart, arrogant, as they said in the synopsis there. But, you know, for the most part, erring on the side of good. You can definitely see, as I said in the intro, that moral conflict in him. It's very apparent even from the first few moments of the film. But it is one of those things where it's like you just see somebody who, you know, might be a little too smart for their own good. They don't know how to, you know, handle themselves as much. In Sebastian Kane is where, you know, they've had nothing but praise, nothing but, you know, opportunity after opportunity. They've gotten to this point where they're about to make one of the biggest scientific breakthroughs of all time. And he just seems like a very bored character. Like life just isn't enough for him. And, you know, that's kind of what we get with the opening moments of this film. We see him working on the formula. We see him kind of, you know, going through the phases. Everything's failing. And, you know, he's just trying to figure it out. And they do a lot of that show don't tell, in the sense of him peeping on his neighbor as she's kind of getting changed and stuff. And it really does kind of lean into, again, like I said, the perverse depravity of just like you kind of see where Sebastian Kane's other interests kind of lie.
Yeah, and just going into, I want to talk very briefly about the opening to this because
Oh,
I
absolutely.
love the opening of the rat running through the cage, and just you don't know if you're going into this film for the first time, you don't know what the significance is, and there's this rat running through the cage, going to the water bowl, and just looking around, and then it just starts getting manhandled, and it's one of my favorite effects of this is
It is good.
because especially later on when we get down to Sebastian Cain just really going off the rails. You just see this rat being contorted, and you have no clue why. And then as it gets bit, and the blood gushing in the gorilla Isabel's mouth, and it's just like the saturating the fangs with the red. I think it's such a great visual for the opening
Mhm.
here, and it really does hint toward a lot of things are going to be happening toward the end of this film. And it's such a great opening to really get you psyched up to see, what you're going to be in store for the entire film here. And then, kind of going into Sebastian Cain, I mean, looking at him, he's already. I'll say this, I want to preface it that Kevin Bacon as a villainous character, I don't think gets any better. You know,
Yeah, he is very good in this as a villain.
we were hoping they slash them was really going to work out for us, but it did not. But he was a shining light in that film. I think he did good. But like being able to see him like full force here, and he's already got this charisma that's um annoying because he's so sure of himself almost. You can kind of see that God complex shine through already. And
Mhm.
I do like this kind of frustration that we get with him already off the bat, where, this guy is a genius in a sense, and he's hitting a brick wall where he just can't crack the code, for this revision. And it's like we've already gotten a lot of the animals, and I think they go through it at the beginning there of, in cages, and you can only see them on the thermal screen. And so, you hint that, he's turned so many of these animals invisible and hasn't been able to bring them back yet. And I
Mhm.
love that scene of him trying to crack the revision at his computer. He's eating Twinkies. He is so frustrated, and then his eyes wander, and he looks over toward his neighbor, and you can already hint to, yeah, this guy is very smart, but there's also something off about him. So it's like he is that kind of opportunistic character of when he gets this element of invisibility, he's going to take advantage of everything that he's been wanting to do that he can't because he's constrained by being visible.
Yeah, and I feel like they play into that very well because it's one of those things where it's like, if you're a single guy living in a high rise apartment, you look over and you see your neighbor, just walking around in a bra and panties. It's like something where you're like, kind of like, oh, that's nice. Maybe you glance a little too long than you should, but there's never that intent of like him where he stands up, he
And he's
draws the
like,
curtains.
yeah,
It's like he's looking at it like, oh, this is a show, as to where like any other civil person would just be like, oh, okay, I'll mind my own business over here. That was a nice little treat, I guess. But it's one of those things where it's like, he's into it. And again, I love the show don't tell aspect that Paul Verhoeven has here, where it is just right off the rip. You just, like you said, you have that God complex. You see he's a smart guy, but it's also one of those things where it's like, again, they go right into one of his main faults that haunts him throughout the entire film, because it's like this is not the only time that we see this depraved nature come out of Sebastian. And it just gets darker and darker as the film persists. He does inevitably end up cracking the code and calling in his team, and we get introduced to Elizabeth Shue and Josh Brolin's character, and we really get to meet the team here. And I'll pull everybody up so that way we got Elizabeth Shue is Linda, Josh Brolin is Matthew. They have a relationship together. Linda and Sebastian at one point were together. So there's that kind of love triangle tension that's there.
and I'm just to cut you off for
Oh,
one
you're good. You're
second.
good.
I love the way they introduced that, where he's calling her on the computer, and she picks up, and then he's like, "Who's that?" It's just like it's such a small little piece of dialogue, but his reaction there, and then to try and shrug it off like he doesn't care, but you can totally tell that he's irritated by it. It's just, I think it's great character work, and I think like looking at that how we're introduced to Sebastian Cain, and then while he's looking at his neighbor, and then even where he's going to, not dropping this Elizabeth Shue's character and having a new boyfriend, where it's like Sebastian Cain really does feel as a character that he's the sun and all the other characters are just rotating around him, and it's like
Mhm.
his world and everyone else is just a pawn.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's a very good way of putting that because it definitely feels that way. And then, they get to the lab. We get to kind of really dive deep into seeing what's going on now that he's assembling everybody. We meet characters like Sarah, who's she's like a veterinarian kind of person, or like an animal expert.
Yeah, she's a vet, I think. The best
Yeah,
vet. I think they do the dialogue of that.
yeah, and then we don't really get into everybody's job here. We just understand that they're all part of the team. We have Mary Randall as Janice, Greg Gutenberg as Carter, and Joey Stolnick as Frank. So those are pretty much our main players on the team here. If you are kind of looking into it, you'll see as the movie that some of these characters are definitely just kind of there for the body count later on.
Yeah.
I have to admit, even though I think this is a great movie, it's handled really well. There are a few of the scientists who are just kind of, they have a few lines of dialogue, but they don't contribute nearly as much as like our core three there. And that's Josh Brolin, Elizabeth Shue, and Kevin Bacon. Clearly, they are our focus. But yeah, and then we get introduced to Isabel, which, if you want to go through that scene, Luke, I know that's you were just stating that you love everything they do with her.
Yeah. And again, that's where they do some great effects. Where Josh Brolin has, is he gonna go feed her? Or no, he's got to put her on the
bring her
table.
in
That's where it
so
is.
they can do this experiment.
And we do the thing where he's going to go in there and sedate her, and she bites his hand, and I absolutely love it. It's like just that effect alone, and it's also showing, how aroused in a sense these animals are after becoming invisible, because I don't think they're sleeping, right? I don't know.
No, and I don't think that they even realize why. I
Yeah,
don't know. I watched it twice and I never picked up on the dialogue if they knew that the animals were seeing through their own eyelids.
yeah.
So
So
it's like, and you got to think as a higher form of being, it drives Sebastian crazy. But you got to think, like, for an animal that has no concept of what's going on at all,
yeah,
at least as a human, you have preparation to know I'm going invisible. There's a lot of weird things that could happen. It's still going to drive you insane. But like as a gorilla, it's like, Jesus fucking Christ, why
like
can't I close
what
my
the hell happened
eyes?
here?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. Again, we're gonna jump all over, but there's a piece of dialogue in here that um I think was so well done, and it's such a small thing that probably a lot of people don't pick up on, is when Sebastian is turning himself, and he goes, "Oh shit, I didn't think it would hurt this much," and he's been doing this
Yeah.
for animals, and it's just like at that point, that's where it clicked for me to be like, no one's putting themselves in any of the animal shoes, so they don't even know what's going on and how aroused they all are and how irritated they can be.
The only person is Sarah, played by Kim Dickens, who is, again, the veterinarian who's even advocating for these poor animals. Like, they have a dog in there. They got all kinds of, they don't even show you all the animals. I think they got
Yeah.
monkeys, they got gorillas, they got all kinds of shit that's just changed. So, and they talk about how they had rats at one point, and
Yep.
that comes up later on when they had to build a device because they wouldn't show up on their heat goggles.
Yeah.
So they needed to locate them. So it's like they've been moving for a long time.
And then this film it does so many great things in terms of hinting toward what's going to be happening later on, because as Isabel escapes the enclosurement and is has to be hunted down by Josh Brolin as well as Sebastian, and they end up being able to sedate her and then bring her into the table. But it's watching this several times and being able to go back, and that interplay between Josh Brolin as well and Kevin Bacon of them being able to, they're betting $10 on who's gonna be able to bring her in. It's very we're foreshadowing of what the ending here is going to look like, and it's such a great scene because I think especially in that first half there, they really start showing off the visual effects and what they can do at that time, and a lot of it really works.
Oh, I agree. They do a good job of again setting the stage for what events we're going to have to deal with later. But it is something where I enjoy the introduction to all of this. I enjoy the introduction to the
I
sedation
love the world,
guns.
yeah.
It's really competent world building. And I think that a lot of that, I got to give credit to Paul Verhoeven, but also to the writers, Gary Scott Thomas and Andrew W. Marlowe. So, Andrew Scott Thomas, he's kind of a working writer in a sense. He's written 31 projects, but you can see he's kind of all over the place with a lot of his stuff. Like he just did the most recent Fast and the Furious. He's based for all characters on Fast and the Furious. I believe he wrote the first film and then, screen story and screenplay. So he's associated with all of them as they go along. And he's one of those people who hasn't done a whole lot there since, as far as just like kind of working in TV, but he's also responsible for a lot of like the classic cartoons that I grew up on, like Angry Beavers and stuff like that. So it's like he's kind of got a unique writing career, and it's one of those things where it's like I kind of just look at it as like he didn't go anywhere too crazy with it. So I'm almost curious to see like what more he could have done had he pursued this and went a little deeper. But the other writer, Andrew Marlowe, he's also credited with Air Force One and End of Days. I've never seen End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Have you seen that one, Luke, from '99?
I've seen it. Like I've never seen it as a full watch. It's always been on TV, so I'd come in like a half hour in, and so I've completed the film, but I've never actually watched it straight through. It's one it does sit down viewing for, because is that a horror movie in a sense or no?
I'm trying to see right now what IMDb has it listed as. It's definitely got some kind of like demonic
Elements
things. It's a fantasy horror thriller is what they label it as, but it's Arnold. It is a movie that I have seen a lot of people recently. Within the last year, I saw some people on Twitter kind of talking about this again and saying that it is one of those movies from the mid '90s that needs or late to mid '90s that needs a reappraisal. But again, another film for my household that was big was Air Force One. So to see that he was credited with that, it's like, again, another great action movie, this time with Harrison Ford. So I don't know were you an Air Force One person?
I've seen Air Force One a couple times. I mean, it's fine for me. It's nothing like, I know there are some diehards out there for Air Force.
I like it a lot.
It's fine. It's an enjoyable film, but it's not something that I turn on Air Force One whenever I have some free time.
Absolutely. But to get back on track, the whole point I was trying to make
Air Force One's podcast now.
Was that these guys, they offer a lot of good elements to it. They're also, I gotta say, they are responsible for the sequel. I have not seen the sequel. Have you ever seen it?
I wanted to watch it before we did this podcast, but
I did too. I didn't either. So maybe we'll have to visit it at some point. I know, and that's one of the things that I was kind of caught off guard by.
Maybe it's due for a mini review from us. Maybe here.
That might not be a bad idea. It's one of those ones where it's like I never hear anything about it. But I'm looking at it right now. I'm not too confident in the sense that the director has done a lot of these direct to DVD Sniper Ultimate Kill and Wilder, Children of Earth, Sniper Reloaded, and all that stuff is kind of his forte. So I'm going to say that Paul Verhoeven's Hollowman is probably less superior to that, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Time will tell.
But yes, to get back to the point I was making after my long-winded rant and research here, was that with these elements, with them looking for Isabel and setting up this in the world building, I'm sure a lot of that's in the script, and I do give those guys credit for it. But again, I think you get a lot of this from Paul Verhoeven because, again, he's a very good director when it comes to world building. I mean, Total Recall is like the total package with that. And again, I assume RoboCop does a good job with that as well. And I mean, even Starship Troopers is one of those ones where it's like, I have that on 4K. That's a very interesting world and just how they build their society and their politics and everything. It's like, he's very good at setting the stage.
I think Paul Verhoeven has such a unique and diverse filmography. Like, he's really not afraid to dive into different worlds. And And I think, Hollowman fits right up there. Again, I don't feel like he leans 100% into it. I really wish he did, because I think, this one would be talked about just like how RoboCop is or Total Recall is. But the world building here is, especially when they're in the lab, I think that's some of my favorite stuff, because, it's not like claustrophobic in the sense that Alien's claustrophobic, but you can definitely get a sense of claustrophobia. And as Sebastian is invisible and stuck there, you start feeling that with him all the way throughout this.
Absolutely. But to kind of keep the story moving here, they end up getting Isabel captured. They put her on the table. We get through a really harrowing sequence, again, going into these CGI visual effects. Again, a little dated, but still very interesting. You see her kind of reform here with all the blood vessels and all the muscles and cartilage and everything all start to form. And I do love the sequence in the sense of she starts to go into cardiac arrest, and you get to see a lot of tension. You see them use the defibrillator, and they see the shocks go through her body and everything like that. It's all really interesting stuff, and a really great way, again, to set it up for, we're only maybe 20 minutes, close to a half hour into the film at this point, maybe. And it's one of those things where it's just like, they've already hit us with, this is a very dangerous procedure, and these guys are really in uncharted waters. But it's also just shows their ingenuity and just how they work as a team. And I think that they present that really well.
Yeah, and just going into that revision scene where, she's coming back and we almost lose Isabel. I think that's a testament to the writing in the director's eye of, that could have been something that could have been done really quick just for a visual feast, I guess you would say, where it's just like, okay, we're going to see her, come back, and that's all we're going to do. Or we see her come back and then she goes into cardiac arrest. But they decide to do it halfway through to really make the most of everything that we're seeing, because I think that's one of the most intriguing visuals in the entire film. It's one of those things that really gets you on the edge of your seat. And again, teases you for what you're going to be in store for later. I think being 20 minutes into this film, I know there are a lot of films that really take a lot of time to get going. But I think Hollowman is one of those films where you're just thrown right into the world at the very start. And they're really just bombarding you with a lot of these themes, a lot of the visuals that you're going to be seeing throughout this film. So it's like, 20 minutes into this, it's like you're already just engulfed into the world of Hollowman.
I agree. And, I think that they really, like we've been saying, do a great job of setting that up. And then we kind of get the success of that. They do a little bit of a celebration. Again, we kind of get to see a moment when they're at dinner with all of their colleagues and everything of kind of the more sweet side of the, Sebastian and Linda romance that was at one point.
Yeah.
But then quickly turns a little bit too aggressive for Linda's liking from Sebastian. You can see that, again, the movie does a great job of pacing this darkness out of him, as to where even in a moment where he is just kind of being sweet and he's kind of just saying, hey, I'm glad with the work we're doing and everything, he sees an opportunity that might be there and he tries to take it, and it's not reciprocated at all, but you can see that aggressiveness that comes out of him right away. And then it's definitely after. And it is one of those things where it's just like, we're just setting the stage for what this kind of a person, what happens when they become God, in a sense, with this science. And then that's quickly followed up with them going to their superiors, the military, I think it is.
Yeah. The Pentagon, right? She says
Pentagon.
You just to the Pentagon.
Oh, yeah, there we go. That's the whole thing. They're going to basically tell them, hey, we had some success. We're going to pass the torch. Everything's good. And Sebastian's like, yeah, we need more time. And everybody's like, what the fuck? And he comes to the conclusion that they're going to take my experiment away from me. I want to be the first to do it. And everybody knows that too. I love that the whole team is just kind of like, you really just want to be the first human being to go invisible. They understand the ego and the arrogance of Sebastian.
Yeah, and that's where I think there's a lot of interesting lines in here. And one of the ones where he goes up to one of the dogs that is now invisible, and he's like petting it, and he just like talking to the dog, but really talking to himself, and he says, "What's it like?" And you can just tell at that point he's just so intrigued by the idea of being invisible and what he could do and achieve, and seeing this in terms of just being the first and lying to the entire military, because he says they're going to take the project and I'm not ready for that. And they said, well, it is their project. And he says, well, it's my vision. And it's just like, again, everyone's a pawn in his world. He's the son, and whatever Sebastian wants is what Sebastian's going to get. So if that means lying just so that he can become the first test subject, so that he can go down in history, even the serum, what does he call it? Kane, whatever numbers
Kane
are.
something. Yeah, it's so egotistical.
And then there's the one scene where I think it's when they are bringing Isabel back, isn't it? Where I'm forgetting his name, but he's up in the booth, and he says he's talking as God, and he says, "You're not God, I am." And I think that just says everything there is to say about Sebastian.
Yeah, and even the slick line. I know this was a little bit before, where he mentions, hey, I want you to get her prepped. We're gonna crack her open. I want to take a look at her brain.
Yeah.
And I dead ass. I was like, oh, he was so serious about that. But her reaction and everybody else's, he knew that he had to be like, I was just kidding, even though you knew, like, he wants to see what's going on. Like, he wanted to dive deep into her skull. And it's just, I love those moments. And again, that's Kevin Bacon at his finest, man. Like, he knows how to play that angle of just likable but evil at the same time. He does another great job. I know we mentioned this is some of his best work as a villain. He does a lot of that too, in not a horror movie, but X-Men First Class.
Yeah.
That's another fantastic villain portrayal from him. And I haven't seen Sleepers, but I hear he's also good in that as a bad guy.
Yeah, I haven't seen Sleepers either.
Yeah, I heard that was very good. I do want to check it out. But yeah, so we get to the point where they're
I did see Sleepers a long time ago. He's a very different villain in that one. Very different.
Yes, he's he's got a thing that he likes to do with little boys.
What a horrible story.
Yes. But he ends up again being this guinea pig, and we get the Hollow Man in a sense, in that beautiful sequence. Again, watching him, we've seen somebody come back from it or something come back from it. Now we get to see them deconstruct, and again, you're like, the pain that he goes through and the fact that they think that he's not going to make it and everything starts going wrong. And then finally we get that reveal, and he's just kind of freely roaming around. Now he's getting to know his new surroundings. And this is the catalyst for the rest of the film, in the sense of them being like, okay, 3 days in, and then, we're going to get you back out. We're going to pull you back. And, that was the plan. And he's supposed to stay at the lab the whole time and everything. But even the first night, I know I'm kind of rushing through, but I just want to, as we do in this segment every time, I want to get us through it. But the first night, he starts to act on, again, that primal pervy nature.
Yeah.
When he starts to harass, sorry, I'm getting everybody's name, Sarah. Yes. He starts to harass Sarah. And he starts unbuttoning her shirt and looking at her boobs and stuff. It's just, it turns into this really, again, unsettling scene, because it is just like, oh, it's just, and he's go ahead.
And from that moment, I think it does a great job of making you unsettled, because you're kind of undecided at that time of what kind of character he is. I know they're planting seeds, but he hasn't crossed over yet. But I think after that scene with Sarah, you absolutely know what type of person he is. And I think that puts you on edge. I mean, they do it when they're discussing Sebastian, and he's basically sitting right there in the chair and they don't even know. And it's just like this kind of voyeuristic wanting in on the conversation, just kind of sitting there and taking everything in and using that later on, So I think that scene with Sarah is so pivotal in this whole thing, where it's just like absolutely unsettling, but really tells you what kind of character he is.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things where Paul Verhoeven, yes, the man has a lot of nudity in his films. And it's something he's very well known for, but I think in this movie more than anything, because even like in Total Recall, it's the 3-boobed lady and a couple other, and it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, it's very eye-catching. It's supposed to be one of those things where it's like, oh wow, that's funny. It's got some humor to it. It's lighthearted. As to where this, he uses nudity and in the sense of these scenarios that Sebastian puts these women in, and it's all just so gross, and it just makes you feel so uncomfortable and dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's like it is a very nice change of pace there, in the sense of, again, as to where Invisible Man kind of stays away from that, in the sense of it getting too overly perverse with it, as to where this movie is very much just showing you the darkness and the just the danger that it would put certain people in if somebody had this ability.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is, and there's no humor about it. It's all very much played for that kind of, essay kind of angle. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's some tough stuff, especially as we progress here and we get to the neighbor's attack. I love the way they set that up and how he just toys with her.
Yeah.
And everything. And then when he finally reveals himself with the mirror, by hitting it and everything, it's just, it's so fucking scary. Because you just know by that point, like you said, after Sarah's scene, you know that there's no real redeeming of this character. He's going full bore. That you're just like, oh man, like, yeah, he's really now going to act on all of these instincts that before he couldn't hide from it, and now he can. Now he feels like there are no consequences. It's just really dark stuff.
And again, hinting, like, as soon as we get with the Sarah character and what happens there, again, we're on edge. And as soon as he leaves the compound, in his little latex suit, I guess, I think at that point you're already wondering, what is he going to get into, and when he's at his house and then he notices his neighbor coming home, it's like at that point you're already absolutely on edge. And it's just one of those things. Go ahead.
I even knew as, like, I probably saw this when I was like 10 years old for the first time, and it was on TV again, so it was pretty cut up. But you even knew at 10 years old when he just saw her come home, just the way, again, that beautiful visual storytelling that Paul brings at the start of this film, that she's in trouble. Like, it's not going to be that, well, I can get much closer now, I can look and things like that. You just can tell from the way that, again, Kevin Bacon, I almost called him Kevin Performance. Kevin Bacon's performance is just so wonderfully choreographed here that it's like, this is dangerous. This is, a predator seeking an opportunity.
Yeah. And like looking at this scene as well, this is why I think like things like the Invisible Man or any iteration that it is, obviously Hollowman is so intriguing in terms of like a threat and a character, because, we look at something like a Friday 13th, anything like that, where it's like sometimes we're seeing it from the point of view of the killer and we can kind of get an idea of, oh, don't go behind what such and such because that's where Michael is or wherever. But like this one, especially in this scene in particular, where we do see a POV shot of him watching her as he rings a doorbell and then she goes outside. And then as soon as we understand that he's inside her house, we don't know where he is. Even though he could be in front of us as an audience, we still don't know where he is. And I think that's where the Invisible Man as a character is such an intriguing concept, because it's able to build that tension of something right in front of us, but we can't see it. And I think that scene in particular is extremely terrifying, especially knowing, he unbuttoned Sarah's blouse earlier and this woman's just in a robe, and it's just like, I think we're all tensed up for her because we know his intrigue, his infatuation with her, and now he's inside her house and she has no clue.
Yeah, and we did kind of jump across some things. I do love the addition of them giving him again the latex skin. I thought was a really nice touch. It all
when he
looks...
scares the kids.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's all really well done, and I know the latex skin was something that comes from the original Invisible Man. It's one of those things where they do a really good job with it here. I love the effects. I think that is some of my favorite work. Just seeing, again, I have it down here in the corner, the openness, the emptiness of the eyes and the mouth. It just all works. It looks so good. And, they do a good job with that. And it is, again, another great visual cue that when, you see that off or laying on the ground, that it's like you can't tell where he's at. It's like, again, it adds that another layer of fear just with something so simple. And then we kind of get to kind of progress us through the film here so we can move on to our other couple segments. Matt and Linda, they come clean with everybody essentially after Sebastian starts losing his mind and starts going a little crazy and getting out and, forcing his way, being very, Sebastian, I guess you should say. It's one of those things too, where they do mention that it's been a little over 10 days since his transformation. So he has been stuck this way for a long time. And it's something where they start saying, okay, we're going to go fess up. We're going to go tell the Pentagon what's going on so we can handle this. We need more people in here, more professionals to help us get this wrangled in. Well, Sebastian finds out about that, ends up killing the colonel in a very, very impactful scene involving the swimming pool there. That was probably the most memorable scene for me as a kid. Just seeing the guy go out to his pool and then get dragged in, and just seeing the effect of Kevin Bacon under the water and seeing his body there, just suffocating and drowning the man. It's one of my favorite sequences in the whole film.
Yeah, I love the sequence as well, but the one that sticks with me is before they go in the pool and he's smoking and the smoke just visibly
hits him.
shows
Oh,
from
it's
it.
so good.
And that's where
So
it's like,
good.
I think they do this so well. They'll do it a little bit later with some blood, but like the smoke one just catches you because it's the first time we're really seeing it happen. And it's just like, by that time, the music cue, they're going in the pool. It's all just like, wait, did that just really happen? And then we're moving on to, you can see him in the water and the water dripping off him and everything. But that smoke for me is just like, because we're building, we're seeing some POV shots. We're not really knowing where he is exactly. The colonel's outside, talking, smoking, and then it's just like, boom, there he is. And then we're off to the races. And I think that's really where, that's where, the aggressiveness comes out of Sebastian, where this really does amp up the horror, I think, in terms of at that point, we're full board and we're going.
Yeah, and he knows that, his friends essentially have, in his mind, stabbed him in the back.
Yeah.
They've given up on him. They are here to, basically hand him in, basically tell mom and dad what he's been doing, and he's not going to have it. So this is where he starts taking his revenge out on people, and they don't know if he's in the facility, if he's out of the facility. It's just like he has now gone full-blown serial killer mode. And this whole third act is just wonderful. Once he gets back into the lab and he admits to them that, oh no, I killed the colonel or general or whatever his name was, his rank, I should say. Once he admits that he murdered him, it's basically everything's off the chain there. He starts taking out people left and right. The one gentleman, oh god, what's his name? The kind of dopier guy.
I don't know his name.
His death. I gotta say, what a fucking great classic Paul Verhoeven.
That one sticks with
gory
me.
As hell.
Yeah.
Like just him getting his neck split open,
yeah,
and blood just spilling
all
everywhere.
over.
He bleeds out for a long time too.
It's vicious.
Yeah, it is, and it's just one of those things where, again, them kind of having to move through this facility and try to find Sebastian using the heat goggles, which are only slightly working in some spots. He's able to get around it. Again, he's a genius. So
he's
it's one of those things where it's like, he's figured out a way to get around it all. And this leads to, again, one of my favorite sequences in the film when Sarah goes to get the blood.
Mm.
And she knows that she's in there with Sebastian, so she starts opening these blood packs and throwing them everywhere, and he's right behind her, and she covers him with the blood, giving us probably my favorite visual in the film. Again, you brought up the paint from The Invisible Man. This is, again, that in a sense, but I think so much more effective and so much more unique.
And I just, he gets drenched in the blood in the follow-up to that, her death.
Oh, yeah.
For me, it's just vicious, where he shoots her with a tranquilizer. She's completely out, and he just snaps her neck.
Oh, yeah.
No,
it's
blood.
brutal.
It's horrible. It's one of the ones that sticks with me, as well as the one guy that's just bleeding out. I think those are probably the two most effective for me, that I can think of. But her scene of just, I think he says, "What? I loved your feistiness," or something like along those
I always
lines.
admired your feistiness.
And it's just like so kind of pervy and weird, and he's drenched in blood and then just snaps her neck when she's totally out of it. Just, I mean, I think that's where it's like the epitome of like, oh my God, this guy is just so vicious and disgusting.
Yeah, and again, they have a lot of really great death scenes here. Again, that's why I said that a lot of the extra scientists kind of just become cannon fodder. But again, it's entertaining, and they're not terrible. I mean, I've seen worse developed characters, especially if you go through some of these Friday the 13th
I think they give
films.
enough unique lines and instances for the crew that it doesn't sound like they're just there. I think it's just like, okay, you know, we can have some interplay and everything, but it's hard to pick out their names. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
it's just like we'll kind of give them a couple things, but nothing like too in depth.
Other than when Sebastian pervs on her in the bathroom with Janice, she kind of gets shafted. I would say the most, because she dies off screen. Kind of, you see the start of it, but they find her body later.
Yeah.
And then she's just kind of dispatched pretty early on in the third act. And then everybody else just gets these gruesome kills. And I mean, then we talk about Frank. I'm just looking at the cast list now, so I'm getting names straight. But Frank, he gets stabbed with, what was that? Was that what do they call those poles that they put the bags on when you get like fluids and stuff?
I don't know what they're called. No,
I don't know. It was some kind of a pole or something. He gets jammed through the chest with that, which looks really great. And then they kind of they start moving through, and eventually we just get down to Matt and Linda, Josh Brolin, and Elizabeth Shue.
Yeah.
And that's when everything gets really personal. Josh Brolin gets very badly injured. And then it comes down to Elizabeth Shue having to use her intellect and just her, science brain in the sense to figure out how she's going to best Sebastian. And she ultimately prevails by building a flamethrower. So again, if you know me and you know my favorite horror film, flamethrowers, they go a long way for me. She builds like a little homemade flamethrower thing and starts trying to burn his ass, which I love when he's all like dressed back up and ready to go back out, and she burns him and you see all the ash start to fall off of him. Like, again, great visuals for effects that are a bit dated. They still hold up in a lot of ways. I don't think they're the best in that we've ever seen, but they work so well. And they will always be one of those things where it's like, it is beyond serviceable. I would say that they're just good.
Yeah, and that's where it's like, I think they handled a lot of the effects with care in terms of like the movement to make it seem natural and everything. So again, it's something where a lot of, especially films around this time and even a little more recent, some effects can be pretty offensive in terms of going back and rewatching it. Where Hollowman, I never have a problem going, yes, they are somewhat dated, but they're very passable, and that they don't take you out of that viewing. And I think this one, I absolutely love when she's hitting him with that flamethrower, and like the latex is just sticking to him because he's being burnt and it's not all coming off of him. And I think that was such a smart play of be like, okay, well, it's not all, he's not going to be burned completely off. It's just going to be kind of stuck to him. And I love that visual. I
do too. And I love how after she's trying to help Matt and she ends up using she uses the defib on him, doesn't she?
Yes.
Yeah. And he is then kind of suspended in that, kind of half invisible, but you see some of his muscular stuff and everything. He's very fleshy. I love that. And then it kind of ends in this, I call it the Deep Blue Sea sequence, where they're moving up the elevator shaft, and he starts attacking them and everything. And then he is kicked off, sent down to his death into a burning inferno. And the movie, Matt and Linda, they make it out, and the film concludes. And that's Hollowman. And we've gushed through it. We've gotten to talk about some of our favorite scenes and everything. So why don't we start without any hesitation, let's move on to our next segment with Behind the Mask. And yes, this is the segment where we just kind of go a little bit deeper into the film, just giving you guys kind of an idea of, what this film did as far as behind the scenes when it came to its release and everything like that. So this was one of those movies that for the time, I guess you would say, had a pretty big budget. If you didn't know, Luke, the budget on this film was 95 million, which was a little shocking for me to see, just in the sense of like they really invested pretty heavily in this. But you also got to think of where Paul Verhoeven was in his career at that point. So we're talking about it's 2000. The guy has offered so many great hits. You got to talk about RoboCop, Total Recall, Basic Instinct, Showgirls, which was kind of a stinker for him.
Yeah.
But then followed up with Starship Troopers, which a lot of people loved and had fun. So by this point, studios were pretty okay, I guess, with giving this guy a big budget. And for a film that at the time was marketed and bolstered by the effects that they were putting on screen and having this cast for the year 2000, it's one of those things where it's like, I see where the money went. And I think that for this, the money went in all the right places. Like you have a great cast who at this time weren't like mega stars other than Kevin Bacon, I would say, and maybe Elizabeth Shue at that point. But it's one of those things where they casted competent character actors who would later go on to have very big careers, especially, you look at like Josh Brolin, who had been in things like The Goonies since he was young, but, coming up into this, he wasn't, the same person that he is today, where he comes out and everybody's like, oh, that's fucking Thanos. You know what I mean? He's in one of the biggest films of all time. So it's like, it's like kind of higher mid-tier actors after Kevin Bacon and Elizabeth Shue. And then again, all going into the effects. They really use them to the best of their ability. They put the money in there. It wasn't wasted.
Yeah. And, it's like, I think other than Kevin Bacon, I think, Elizabeth Shue was a name, but she wasn't like a marquee name at that point, and Josh Brolin, nowhere near the trajectory that he's on at this point. But it's like, I think this film feels more like a general audience film. I think that's, again, where I keep kind of going back to it, where it's like, I feel like they set out to make more so a general audience film, but it had a little too much Verhoeven flavor on it. So maybe it was harder to find that kind of happy medium there. But it's like, looking at this, you could easily say a lot of the budget went to the effects, just because I think, again, it takes a lot to make a film in the year 2000 and to still have it passable in 2023 with the differences in CGI and just technology. But yeah, I could easily see a lot of those the bigger part of the budget going into the effects.
Absolutely. And to kind of give you some insight to the, background of making this film, this is one of very few films. This happens a little more often than you'd think, but it's still pretty rare. This film was shot in chronological order because of the laboratory. As the film continues on, the laboratory gets more damage and things like that. So because of that being such a big set for them, they needed to wait until towards the end of the shoot to shoot a lot of the final sequences. So, this is, again, one of those few films, rare films, that get shot in chronological order, which the ending sequence with the explosion, I wrote here, was captured with 14 cameras in various angles. So they got so much coverage because they were blowing the fuck up out of that set. And
I assume you only get really one take.
Yes, that's pretty much, I think, the intent there. One of the other things that I to note here was that Elizabeth Shue tore her Achilles tendon midway through the shoot on this. And, they had to shut down production for 7 weeks. And at one point, the producers considered replacing her. But they were able to resume in August of 1999 and ran until February. So, that might contribute to some of that bloated budget if you look at things. at that time for a movie like this, because again, 100 million, that's especially in today's day and age, that's bigger budgeted films. You see a lot of these horror genre pieces that get maybe at a high end 35-40 million is what they're coming out at. But yeah, it's like at the time this was that's a lot of money to throw at it. So there's some contributing factors here. This is one of the few films as well that got permission to shoot in front of the actual Pentagon. So that sequence where they're leaving the Pentagon, that is the real.
Is this sorry to cut you off? Is this marketed as a horror film, or is it more so like a sci-fi? I was just curious because it's like I know like by the end of it, we fall into pretty much a slasher type film, and I think maybe that could turn people off in terms of kind of going full board horror. And if it wasn't marketed as a horror film and more so like science fiction or suspense thriller, I could see people coming into this thinking they were going to get one thing, and then by the end of it being turned off by the slasher vibes by like the last half hour.
I'm looking right now as far as release. It just seems like a lot of they're going over just kind of what it went up against, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it definitely was marketed a little bit more as a science fiction film with horror elements, is what it's kind of saying here. So they really leaned into those effects to market the film, which I totally understand, looking at the time we were in. So it's like CGI was still becoming a big thing. We had Jurassic Park a few years before that. So it's kind of like they're looking for that next big, we're gonna blow people away with these special effects. And one of the things that was to note here that I have is that at one point, for the character of Sebastian, Guy Pearce and Edward Norton were heavily considered, both for taking on that film. Now, we love Kevin Bacon, but I do see, say what you will about him, I could easily see Edward Norton stepping in here and doing a very good job as well. Just with the kind of character that Sebastian is, with that arrogance to him. But again, I don't think I would want it that way. I'm very happy with Kevin Bacon in this role.
Yeah, for me, I think I would have had a struggle with Edward Norton coming off of something like American History X, where I think he can play an arrogant character, but not the way that Kevin Bacon can. I don't think he can do the line delivery in terms of the confidence and the charisma that Kevin Bacon is able to bring to Sebastian Cain. I think would be a little bit harder for Edward Norton to do. Just sometimes I think he's a little more meek in his performances. I'm more so like looking at something like a Bruce Banner or something like that, where it's like he doesn't really play that 100% charismatic kind of character that I would believe that, like how Kevin Bacon, falls down the rabbit hole of being so opportunistic and just vile. I don't know if I could buy that from Edward Norton.
Yeah, and so Paul Verhoeven agrees with you, because he says that he selected Kevin Bacon just for his ability to be both charming and diabolical.
Oh, okay.
Was what he saw in him. So that's why he was like, I want him. So that's definitely what influenced his decision there. And then kind of going into a little bit of the release on this, Hollowman, despite negative response from critics, yes, this movie was not loved by the critic masses here. Debuted at number 1 ahead of Nutty Professor 2, and it opened with 26.4 million during its opening weekend, which you got to think for the time, was pretty good. The film achieved the second highest August opening weekend behind The Sixth Sense, and the first film since Mission Impossible 2 to top the box office for multiple weeks. After 15 weeks of release, Hollowman had grossed 73.2 million in North America and just over 117 million globally, which gave to its a total of $190.2 million in total. And it was Paul Verhoeven's biggest hit since Basic Instinct. So it all worked out in the end, despite some negative critic reception. and that's what did we say, 90? It was $95 million put into it. So overall, a pretty big hit, which makes sense why it got a sequel. Sucks to hear. Probably that critical reception is why it went straight to DVD and didn't get as much love and attention.
Yeah, and again, I think Paul Verhoeven is such a unique director. I don't think his taste is for everybody, so it does intrigue me that they, gave him a big budget like this for a more so, I guess, general audience film. Like, this came out in August, so that's kind of like,
It is a
around
weird
those.
time.
Yeah, and I could have easily seen, especially for a lot of critics going into this one. Again, it falls heavily by that last half hour into a very slasher vibey kind of film. And, horror is not really looked upon, especially back then, very positive. So if you're going in expecting a sci-fi thriller and you walk out with a half hour of slasher vibes, I think, that's really going to affect that rating. So again, I could see that kind of some of that Verhoeven flavor mixed with the slasher vibes could have really kind of hamstring this film.
And I was about to say, as far as horror back then, I definitely see it being a bit of a drawback for some of the critics. At the time, a lot of people were really into the big budget action, and then you still have big dramas and stuff coming out of that point. They're really the only big horror movies that we're getting. Horror films that were getting a lot of praise were things like The Sixth Sense that they mentioned there. But again, that is because it's more of a thriller, if you want to say, and it's got a lot of heavy drama in it. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting time for the horror genre. It wasn't as beloved.
It was trying times, and especially the late 90s, early 2000s, and going into the 2000s. Ugh, some rough stuff coming out of there.
Absolutely. But unless you have something else you want to follow up on, Luke, I think it's best time that we move on to our next segment.
Let's do it.
Alrighty, in our next segment, we love to call Everybody's a Suspect.
Prom night, they'd save time. There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
Yes, and we've really gushed about Kevin Bacon and, his performance a lot through this. So I kind of want to focus a little bit on mostly our two other characters that are in this love triangle. Again, a lot of the other actors are very serviceable. So we'll kind of run through them a little bit. I enjoyed Joey Slotnick as Frank. He's the guy who makes the God joke that you said, and then gets stabbed through the chest. Mary Randall, I feel, gets a bit shafted in the sense of her being Janice, who again dies off screen and really doesn't have a lot to do. Greg Gutenberg, I believe, plays that gentleman that we were talking about who gets his throat slashed. Yeah, that's okay. Carter. Yeah, his name was Carter. Again, very funny actor. Very much I enjoyed his humor that was brought to it. But again, didn't have a whole lot to do other than his very impactful death that we give it there. And then Kim Dickens as Sarah, who I would say out of all of the rest of the supporting cast definitely has the most meat and the most teeth to work with.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things where I think a lot of the characters here don't exist unless they're in a unit, because you need that interplay with everybody, so you don't really get too many standalone scenes with anyone. Whereas, I think Sarah was probably the shining light out of the bunch, just because she does have some more standalone scenes than anyone else, and kind of really does kind of push that Sebastian Cain narrative of him really kicking off those toxic traits that we've lightly been seeing throughout the rest of the film. Did we talk about, again, I don't know his ranking, I love the Colonel or whoever he is.
William Devane.
Yeah.
I believe his name was Dr. Kramer.
He's absolutely terrific. I love him.
Mhm.
I know I've seen him in a handful of things, and every time he's on screen, he just has a captivating presence for me. And again, his death is just one of the most iconic scenes in this film.
Absolutely. He was definitely somebody that I recognize from a lot of TV, as well as just that one of those familiar faces. He's the president in The Dark Knight Rises. I remembered that. But yeah, he does pop up here and there in a lot of stuff. Even just looking through his filmography here, mostly TV stuff, but back in the 90s, he was in so many direct to DVD movies, direct to TV movies,
He
playing
always pops up.
coaches, presidents, congressmen, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, a very recognizable character actor. But yeah, no, I thought that he did great. I love his sequence where he goes to when his wife asks, like what's the situation kind of thing. And he's like, oh, just another mess or whatever he says. It's a good line. I
Oh,
like
he
it.
says enough to wake a few generals.
Yes, enough to wake a few generals. A very good line from a great character actor. But I mean, really, again, I think the people we got to highlight in this segment are Elizabeth Shue and Josh Brolin as Linda McKay and Matthew Kensington. Both, I think, in the sense of their chemistry as a couple. I thought that they were a very nice couple to see on screen. You could tell that there was definitely a strong connection between them. As juxtaposed to how Sebastian's acting, a very healthy adult relationship
Yeah.
between those two. And I think it's just exacerbated because of just how Sebastian is. But again, I thought that they not only worked well as a couple, but they were great as scientists and really convincing you that even though they know what Sebastian is doing is wrong, he's still, in their eyes, he's still a friend to them
Yeah.
for the most part. And they really struggle with that morally. And I think one of my favorite sequences, oddly enough, with them is the Pentagon sequence and right after, when you can see that they're both conflicted and they both know that they shouldn't be doing this, but because Sebastian is Sebastian, they're going to let him go forward with it.
Yeah. And looking at those two, I always look at the Josh Brolin and Elizabeth Shue as almost the audience's voice, where they're so close to him and they're looking at his behavior, and you can tell that there's something wrong with it. But they look him as a friend, but I also see them as a professional sense as that superior, and it's hard to shake it. Where it's like, if this is the way Sebastian's going to go, we kind of have to follow suit. And it's like, again, like you said with that Pentagon scene where they're coming out of there saying, you just lied to the Pentagon, and he's making a case, and it's very easy for him to, almost steamroll them and get them on
Mm-hmm.
his side for everything. Because then when we jump to him telling the rest of the crew about this, Elizabeth Shue kind of comes to his aid.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of giving a defense as to other scientists have done this previously. So it's not that off the wall. So, I think they kind of, even going through it as we're seeing him dive down the rabbit hole of this volatile behavior, I still think they almost don't want to believe it, but they know that it's true. So it's kind of like they're trying to turn the other cheek, but it just doesn't work for them. And then eventually, they have to go hunt him down. And again, I think they add a great dynamic between trying to tiptoe the relationship by Sebastian, even though he's just this normal guy. You can tell how scared they are, especially Elizabeth Shue, of not wanting to say anything to him because of what the recourse could be. So, I think it really adds a great dynamic, but also this very murky dynamic that you don't want to really get into as a human being.
Yeah, and I think Elizabeth Shue does bring another element to it with the fact that she was in a previous relationship with him. And it seems that they've ended on good terms, but also I think she clearly shows that this is somebody you do not want to upset, and
Yeah.
she gets that impression. I think that it's kind of implied that by the time they separated, Sebastian's kind of become a very different person from that relationship.
Yeah.
He's a little bit more fractured from it, but it is one of those things where it's like, yeah, I'm sure there were elements as they went along, but again, to top this all off, we'll just have to mention that Kevin Bacon, I mean, we've talked about him the whole podcast, very charismatic, very evil performance, definitely the most entertaining part of this movie. Again, watching him not only be this depraved, perverse person in some sequences, but also just be able to switch to that charming, likable, jokey guy. And it's like it's just very hard for me to not love Kevin Bacon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even though he's an absolute animal in this.
And that's where it's like looking at him. I couldn't imagine anyone else playing that role, Sebastian Cain. He really does move this film. It really does surround him. If he did not work as a character, the whole film would not work. And I really think, Stir of Echoes is a horror movie, but he doesn't play a villain in it. Looking at this is really like the shining light of Kevin Bacon being a villain. And I know there's a narrative out there that Kevin Bacon could play a great Freddy Krueger. And I think this film here really showcases, that kind of charisma that he has, the villainous character that he can be. I think this is really a showcase of his talent.
I know some people might get upset, and, hint, hint, we do have some big stuff coming for our boy Robert Englund pretty soon here. But it is one of those things where Kevin Bacon, I think, would be a beautiful Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
Again, I think if there's anybody who could really pick up the mantle, it's going to be him. And I think that Robert Englund has even stated that of all the people, he would enjoy seeing Kevin Bacon step into the role. And yeah, I just, not to get on the whole tangent, but yeah, I have my little fanscription, my little fan write-up of a script for a Nightmare on Elm Street reboot if we were to do it. And yeah, even I have it written in there as Kevin Bacon would be the one portraying Freddy Krueger. Just because, again, you're right. This movie's a good example of it. You have that charisma, but also that darkness, and he just does a great job of switching them on and off.
He weaves them in and out, less like perfectly. It's like you don't even see the switch flipped. He does it so well. It's just like 1 minute he's one thing, next minute he's the next.
Again, and that sequence where he talks about cutting open Isabel is that perfect 1-2, 1-2. It just as soon as he realizes he has gone a bridge too far, he's back, and it's just like, oh, I'm just kidding. It's so seamless. It's very, very gaslighty. You don't like it at all, but it's great. Anyway, why don't we move on to our effects portion, which we call Creatures Features. Alrighty, so as stated, this was where the bulk of the money went to for this. And I mean, they have a lot of notes, a lot of cool little things about it. Because again, you've had green screen work before up to this point, but it's one of those things where kind of replacing and getting rid of an entire human being in the way that they do it. Because I mean, they do it in The Invisible Man. It's done very practically, done very well in that original film. But to have it go to the length that they do, where they start showing his facial features through smoke and through water and blood and all the other things that they do here, it was quite an undertaking. And it is one of those things where, it does say that the undertaking that it took was very frustrating for not only Paul Verhoeven, but also Kevin Bacon himself, because originally it was pitched that he wouldn't have to be on set for a lot of these visual effects because the way it was written in the script and the way that they thought they were going to shoot it, they could just have him do voiceover work and things later and then be able to key everything in on their own. But when they started working on the thing and they had somebody standing in as the green screen suit, Paul Verhoeven quickly realized that, a lot of Kevin's body language and a lot of his emoting and stuff, that's all going to come through the effects. So he had to ask Kevin to come in and be in the suit. So he's got a lot of long days where he's just in a green screen suit. And we recently just experimented with that. And I can tell you, I wouldn't want to be in that in a hot set for very long. So it is one of those things. Yeah, it's like he really had to tough it out. But I mean, he was a trooper. It was one of those things where it was said that, he definitely toughed it out, and it was great. I would love, on an off tangent for this, to get a commentary for this. I don't know if there's one out there already, but like if Scream Factory could put this movie out on Blu-ray or 4K, give us a nice restoration, and have Paul Verhoeven or Kevin Bacon or anybody come back and talk about the making of this film, I would eat it up in a heartbeat, because I just would love to get more into their shoes on how that went.
I just want to see this unedited scenes of just Kevin Bacon walking around in a green screen suit while they're all acting in the scene. I think that
There
would
you
be
go.
that'd be such a fun time. But yeah, like I know we're talking about the effect, but I think that is also a testament to Kevin Bacon's performance. Is they needed him there for the other actors to work off of, because he's such an effective actor that you can't get that anywhere else. That you really need him there. And I think that's also kind of the, pluses and minuses of CGI effect is, people talk about we're acting against a green ball or something like that. We're not getting the performances that we want. In this film, again, is one of those films where it was a big visual effects feast, and it still maintains that today. And I think looking at this one, we've already talked about it in a couple different segments. They really make the most out of the ideas of this Invisible Man kind of character. Where looking at the newest iteration of the Invisible Man, they have a couple, but I really think looking at Hollowman, it's such a showcase of bringing out the potential and the terror of an invisible character, and seeing his silhouettes and being drenched in different liquids, and taking him on this journey of finding the reasons for all this to happen, and then the effects of the revisions and being able to see each different organ and coming back into visibility. I think the script alone and everything that they did, they really made the potential for these visual effects.
I agree. I think that it is again one of those things where they had a lot of obstacles. They were really stepping into some stuff that they had never done before, as not only a cast but a crew, and something where they really made the most of their situations and what they had to do with. But again, you're right. A lot of the performance that is given here is I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought when I say this, but it's one of those things where I don't think that you would have, if you just would have had Kevin Bacon out of the suit and everything, I don't think some of these scenes would have been as impactful, or at least I don't think you would have had as well executed as they were.
Yeah, it would have been a different performance from a lot of the different actors, I think.
Yeah, I don't think the intensity would have been there. Yeah, and they definitely relied a lot on it. They talk about how to pull off things like the latex suit. They talk about how they had to have like green like sunglasses panels around the eyes so that Kevin could still see, but they were able to get rid of them using effects and things like that. So like they had a lot of really neat tricks when it came down to it. That again, we said it a lot this podcast, they still hold up, and
Yeah.
I still think that they offer a lot of very unique perspectives and a lot of very things that I feel like even if you try to do it today, I don't know if they would be as impactful as this movie is able to pull it off.
Yeah.
There's a lot of detail to the reforming and deforming of both the gorilla and Kevin Bacon that I just feel like if you tried to do that today with certain films, I don't think they would hit it with as much nuance and as much detail as Paul Verhoeven did.
Yeah, and again, I think everything in this film really shows so much attention to detail, where they make sure the movements are down just right, and I think that's really a big selling point with some of these visual effects, because you look at even some current stuff today, and it's like, I don't know if the movement is quite right, and it just seems off for the effect entirely. This is a film where, as we go through the podcast and everything, it's no secret that both Dylan and I are really big fans of practical effects, but this film here is something I would have loved to have just seen the visual effects team work, because having that green screen, trying to do latex, all this other stuff, probably posed a lot of different elements that they were not even prepared for and just had to work on the fly, just because that's how filmmaking is done. I would have really loved to have seen all the obstacles that were presented, especially having Kevin Bacon back on set and green screen suit and all this other stuff, and just to see what that would have presented, because I'm sure there were a lot of headaches in this movie as well.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, we've fiddled with some green screen recently ourselves, and that's a different animal entirely, for sure. But alrighty, I think if there's anything else you want to say about effects, Luke, or you want to bring this bad boy home?
Let's bring it home.
Alrighty, and we're moving into our final segment called It's Only a Movie.
Action to play this theater. This picture, truly one of the most unusual ever filmed, contains scenes which under no circumstances should be viewed by anyone with a heart condition or anyone who is easily upset.
To avoid fainting, keep repeating. It's only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie.
And yes, this is our final segment where we just talk about not only the film's legacy, but just our thoughts and everything we've discussed today and where we think this film is going to stand going forward. And, again, we said it up front. I don't think that the legacy of this film has really hit with people just yet. I think people like us and people like Cody Leach, who, are discussing this right now, I think that we see it. We're a little ahead of the curve, to jerk ourselves off a little bit here. But it is one of those things where I do see this starting to pop back up in people's heads. I would love to see a company like Scream Factory or Arrow or even Criterion come back and put a really nice Blu-ray out for this, or 4K. Give us all those special features. Let us get a little deeper into the mind of Paul Verhoeven and all the actors and everything. And really just remind people that, you do have the original Invisible Man. You have it in your background, and I have the NECA box there. You have Lee Whannell's, but then also you have this film right in the middle that I think gives you a lot of the best of both worlds and sets itself apart. And again, it's one of those movies that when Cody made the video about it and I, was reinvigorated, it came back into the ether. I was just like, man, that would be a great pick for the podcast. And I'm so happy to have gone back and watched it again. Like we said, this is on HBO Max at the moment, or Max. I guess that happened this week as if we're recording this. But it is one of those things where it's like, it's on there, and I mean, it still hits. It hits just as well today as it did the first time I saw it. And I think that as if this is something you haven't watched in years, I highly recommend throwing this on, especially like a late afternoon on like a Friday night, and just sit back and look at this, because again, it's one of those movies that is not equal parts entertaining in the sense that it has those slasher horror-y vibes, but at the same time, you can tell there's a lot of expertise behind the camera. I think this movie shows Paul Verhoeven in a very special spot where, like I said, there's a ton of that show don't tell, a ton of that relying on the actors to really be the ones to present that fear, and not so much reliant on the blood and the gore, which there is, and it's great, but it does really lean into that fear of what would happen if someone didn't have to deal with consequences, if someone could tap into that more primal, perverse nature, and they didn't have to think about somebody finding them, and they could just hide away.
And for me, it's no secret. We started this podcast. I watched this when it came out on DVD. I've watched it, several times prior to, years ago. And then I've watched it twice here in preparation for the podcast. And I got to be honest, I can find myself watching this here again in another month just for fun. Because specifically, like watching Kevin Bacon just cook as Sebastian Cain is just one of the most compelling pieces of character work I've ever seen. So it's like to look at him, I think that really models what a villainous character should implement in terms of, starting at some sort of baseline and then just falling down a rabbit hole of being volatile and toxic. And it's one of those ones where it's a disaster to watch, but it's just such a great movie going experience to be able to see. And this is one that I would love to see Scream Factory release for just the artwork alone. But I would love to see, a Kevin Bacon commentary as well, just to see everything that he had went through. But this film, again, I think we are a little bit ahead of the curve here. I think this will be found eventually by a bigger part of the horror community because it is just so well done. And again, the effects do hold up still, so it doesn't take you out of it. And it's not really a cheesy film at all, I don't think, where it's like sometimes looking at dialogue or jokes or anything like that, they don't work in a modern time. But I think, he really created a timeless film here with some timeless performances and effects that still hold up. So I can really see this one being dusted off by the horror community here within the next couple of years, and a lot of people talking about how actually Hollowman is one of the best films of 2000. But I could easily see that. And one of the questions that I did want to bring to you, Dylan, is watching this and also watching the 2020 version of The Invisible Man. I was just curious for you. What is your favorite storytelling device where we have Sebastian Cain and we follow that type of character throughout his kind of, falling down the disastrous hole of taking opportunity after opportunity? Or do you like the invisible man kind of storytelling device where he's that villain character where we don't really sit with, we don't know where he is, where we don't get in his head, he is just that villain?
They both are very different, and they both present a lot of great opportunities as far as horror and storytelling devices go. I will say that I think that The Invisible Man is scarier than Hollowman in its approach, because I do like that you sit with Elizabeth Moss as your main character. You're in her perspective the entire time. As to where I think that Hollowman is a much better character study, in the sense of, you really get to see the descent of, Kevin Bacon's character, Sebastian Cain. If I had to pick a preference, it might just be because we're talking about it and I'm high off my viewing, and I have not seen Invisible Man since I saw it in theaters. I own the 4K, and I do love that movie, but I did not get around to watching it beforehand. But I think I'm going to say I like Hollowman's approach a little bit more. But again, I think it all comes down to not only the approach you take, because if I was to write this myself, I would probably go with something that's a little closer to Lee Winnell's take, where he is a little bit more in the shadows. But it is something where, I enjoy this approach, and just seeing, again, him fall into that descent, and just watching this character understand new facets and elements of this with the audience, and then what they do with it. So I'm going to say Hollowman is my preferred approach right now. But again, in maybe a few months, a few years, we'll be talking about, Lee Winnell's Invisible Man on here, and I could feel completely different. It's they are just such two very unique films, both great in their own right. But for me, I'm going to say Hollowman right now.
Yeah, and for me, because I did watch Invisible Man in preparation for this, just to kind of compare the two. I'll say from a writing perspective, I think Hollowman presents a lot more fun in terms of being able to take a character and just go from a straight-laced character to a more volatile type of character. So I think right now, I think that's just my preference. But I think, The Invisible Man has a lot of great tension built because we're not with that character, and he is just that kind of specter in a sense. I do think that, kind of my brain got working a little bit and thinking it would have been interesting to see Sebastian Cain with almost a suit that he can go in and out of invisibility while we're still seeing him as a visible character, and kind of always not knowing if he is around, or because he's not stuck in being invisible. So I think there would be an interesting story to be told there as well. But, right now, I'm riding high on that Hollow Man idea as well.
If you had to ask me, and I'll ask you this as kind of like a reverse to that question, what do you like better? Do you prefer the suit, or do you prefer the bio style of turning him invisible?
So again, I think they're two really different devices. I think the idea of the suit is a little more grounded for me because I could see that actually happening. So I think the visual of the organic kind of version of invisibility offers a lot of great visuals, but I think my preference would probably be the suit.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go. And I guess maybe this is my love of old movie monsters in the sense of just kind of being in peril, being cursed in a sense. I like the bio more organic style because again, um, it would just take something as easy as switching the character of Matt and Kevin Bacon and seeing somebody who's sympathetic have to deal with this, who's a little bit more morally just have to deal with this, and you have a totally different movie.
Yeah.
You really do. You have this movie where maybe Sebastian is poking and prodding at Matt more and using him as a guinea pig. And then, you obviously have Matt who has to deal with this. And, maybe his, outings outside of the lab are a little less perverse. But again, we have to take into effect that there is the madness element of not even being able to close your eyes, not even being able to sleep.
Yeah.
It's like, what does that do to somebody? And, I think that this is one of those movies again, that I wish the sequel would have panned out better. I hear it's not
Definitely.
great in what we saw, but we'll have to watch it and do a little follow-up video at some point. But yeah, it's one of those things where I would have loved to see the story go a little further. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'm happy with what we have. I'm very happy with Hollow Man, and I gotta highly recommend it.
Absolutely. I'm right down there with you. It's a film I've watched at the start. I still watch nowadays. It's a breezy, an hour 30 something, I think. So it's something, if you haven't seen, well, you listen to the whole podcast, you got to go check it out now. But it's one of those ones, endless rewatchability. I think it's always a good time whenever you turn on Hollow Man.
I agree. Alrighty, folks, but that is going to bring us to the end of this episode of SplatterCast. Yes, we just discussed Hollow Man in depth, and yeah, we got another great one on the horizon for you coming next month. We did the double episode in May. So again, sorry for our tardiness for the last couple of months, but
trying to make
up for it. A lot of great, yes, absolutely. I think we did. And we had a lot of great content hit the channel. Obviously we've had our reviews, we've had a video essay. Again, we've been doing a lot of great work with Screambox. They've again always got to highlight them, have been very kind to us. And, we've got a lot of fun stuff there. If you hadn't checked out the last episode, episode 20, we covered Silver Bullet, which
very
was,
fun.
Again, a lot of fun. That's a very important film to us. So especially if you listen to the first episode of SplatterCast, where we talk about it a little bit. But yeah, we talk about that film for about 2.5 hours. So, we go deep. And this one, I think, is a little bit more paced. But yeah, I mean, we have a lot of great stuff on the channel as of now. It's been a slow month with May, but yeah, we're ramping back up, baby. We teased it a little bit. We got some Robert Englund stuff coming up here soon, as well as The Boogeyman, which as of recording is coming out next Thursday for us. So
we'll
be checking that out.
VOD stuff coming, looks like, over the summer too.
Yes, lots
Every
of
time
stuff.
I'm on Bloody Disgusting, something pops up. It's like, it's coming to VOD next month.
Oh, yes, we're going to be talking a whole lot about it. So stay with us on the Sunday Scaries week to week if you want to hear about that. We definitely try to highlight some of those smaller releases when we can. Of course, we're going to have a lot more interviews, a lot more fun stuff coming to you guys, and a lot more of the original content as well. As always, we try to keep it more than just the reviews and everything, but we've kind of found our place, found our niche, and our structure a little more. So we're getting there. So I've had a couple video essays. Luke's got his series of slashes and suplexes. I hope we get another episode of that. I'm crossing my fingers. But I know
We've
that
got
was
something cooked up.
I know you do, and you've been talking about it. I'm very intrigued because yeah, it seems a little interesting. This is one you've been talking about for a while too.
Yeah.
So. But yeah, no, other than that, we're gonna have a lot of great collabs as well. And just keep it here. It's gonna be a fun summer. And yeah, that's pretty much everything we got right now. As of recording, we are at 980 or 880 or 98 898 subscribers on YouTube. So yes, we're getting really close to that 1,000, and we can't thank you guys enough. So if you're new here and you're just discovering us, hit that subscribe button, and yeah, go on this horror journey with us. But alrighty, so I guess that's about it. So until next time, I am Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.